for you who may not know me, introduce myself. My name is Cheyenne Lopez. I grew up, born and raised here in Lucedale. I'm 28 years old as of Tuesday. So this is the first weekend as a 28-year-old, and I'm spending it here with you guys, and I thank you guys for being here. We're just gonna do a brief overview of Black history in America. So I'm just gonna give you a timeline of that history, and that's pretty much what we're gonna do today. So I'm gonna start that, but before we start our timeline, I wanna start by sharing with you all a little bit about the origins of Black History Month itself. In February of 1926, Carter G. Woodson created what was then known as Negro History Week in Washington, D.C. His passion was history, and he desired that everyone shared that passion. He was the second Black American to receive a PhD from Harvard, following behind W.E.B. Du Bois. Woodson sought to ensure that school children were exposed to Black history. He had two main objectives. His objectives were to highlight how Black Americans played important roles in the development of the United States and to increase visibility of Black life and history in a time where few newspapers, books, and universities recognized the Black community except to dwell on negativity. Woodson's mission is why we are gathered here today. Some of you may wonder if Black History Month is even relevant to us now. Well, I'm here to tell you that it is. Black History Month is important. It is a time to honor Black history by retelling the historic stories of violence, exploitation, and the dehumanization of a group of people alongside stories of triumph, hope, and perseverance. We do this to remind ourselves why it is important to treat all people with dignity and respect of their personhood, why it is important that we must go high in times when others may choose to go low. It is a time of reflection, a time to re-examine our belief systems and where we land within them, a time to dialogue with our fellow man, to encourage, inspire, and to learn. You see, Carter G. Woodson understood something about Black history and Black people. Aside from understanding the importance of remembering history, he understood that in those stories we don't just find our past. We find our culture, our strength, and our hope. It tells us who we've always been as a people, in spite of what propaganda and stereotypes may have you believe. Black history, as we understand it today, had its birth in August 1619. A ship docked at Point Comfort in Virginia, housing roughly 20 to 30 enslaved Africans. Those men and women were the beginning of slavery in the United States. Around 12.5 million Africans were shipped to the New World over the course of this mass human trafficking. Of those millions, fewer than 388,000 arrived to the United States alive. Today, we remember the millions of lives cut short by oppressors who dissolved them, living, breathing beings, into objects to be dominated to fulfill their need to have more, always more, even at the cost of the humanity and lives of others. Lives were not the only thing lost during this inhumane Middle Passage. As those captured moved closer to the land of their oppression, their history, names, languages, and their culture was being erased. In spite of this loss, we have the remarkable and rare paper trail of a young girl kidnapped from Africa at the age of 10. This is remarkable because most Black history during this time was lost because records were not kept to preserve the lineage of slaves. This girl was put on a ship on April 9, 1756, to arrive in Charleston, South Carolina, 10 weeks later. She was purchased alongside 4 other children and renamed Pricilla. Later in life, she married a man named Jeffrey and had 10 children. She died in 1811 at the age of 65, leaving behind 30 grandchildren. What is so incredible about her story is that through discovered plantation records, Priscilla's paper trail was found, and we are able to trace her lineage to her living descendants. Her 7th generation granddaughter was invited by the Sierra Leone government to visit the homeland of Pricilla and celebrate what was called Priscilla's homecoming. While that celebration was undoubtedly a beautiful one, we do not know the details of Priscilla's life or the trials she suffered as a slave, forced to work and live under inhumane conditions. The story of Margaret Garner sheds light on how heinous those conditions probably were. Garner's story isn't a beautiful one. Her story is one of tragedy and loss. Garner was a slave who attempted escape by way of the Underground Railroad with her husband and children. In the process, her family was recaptured. Before her captors could obtain them, Garner decided to take matters into her own hands with the intent to remove herself and her children from the equation permanently. She did not completely succeed. Only one of her children met the fate that she had intended for them that day. Those events force us to recognize that husbands and wives, fathers and mothers, human beings with the great capacity for feeling and love, were forced into circumstances that so violated their human rights and dignity that they began to question whether it was worth existing at all. They had to choose between survival and escape. The interest in her story, as Toni Morrison stated, is not the fact of slavery. The interest is what happens internally, emotionally, and psychologically when you are in fact enslaved, and what you do in order to transcend that circumstance. That is really what Margaret Garner's story reveals. As slavery drew to an end, we were left with the story of who was to be the last survivor of the last known ship to sail from Africa with human cargo. Zora Neale Hurston honored the life of Cudjo Lewis, born Oluwale Kazula, by recording and writing his life story. Kazula was a slave illegally transported into the backwater of the Mobile River near Mobile, Alabama, with 115 other African slaves. Hurston interviewed him in 1931 when he was around 90 years old. He told stories of his life in his homeland, details of his grandfather, an officer to a king, stories of his mother and siblings, life and love. He vividly remembered the day he was captured. When Hurston took his photograph, he dressed in his best suit, but removed his shoes and said, "I want to look like I'm in Africa, because that's where I want to be." If you want to know more about his story, you can find it in the book titled Barracoon, The Story of the Last Black Cargo. At the end of slavery, our nation experienced a brief period of Reconstruction, starting from 1865 to 1877. In this time, this country witnessed many great achievements, such as its first black man elected to Senate, Hiram Revels. Just 5 years into Reconstruction, every southern state had put in place the right to a public education for all children. As stated in the 1619 Project, in 1868, Congress ratified the 14th Amendment, ensuring citizenship to any person born in the U.S. Today, thanks to this amendment, every child born here to an European, Asian, African, Latin American, or Middle Eastern immigrant gains automatic citizenship. Ever since, nearly all other marginalized groups have used the 14th Amendment in their fights for equality. Shortly after the 14th Amendment passed, the 15th Amendment, the right to vote regardless of race, color, or previous conditions of servitude, was passed. Unfortunately, the period of Reconstruction was fleeting. In 1877, President Hayes pulled federal troops from the South. The systematic suppression of black life was so severe that this period between the 1880s and the 1920s to 30s became known as the Great Nadir, or the Second Slavery. Yet and still, even in the midst of systematic oppression and threats of violence, black Americans continued to overcome and shape American culture and history. For example, Matthew Henson, an Arctic explorer, was the co-founder of the North Pole, the first person to stand on top of the world. Reeves, a deputy U.S. Marshal, inspired others and was used for popular entertainment. The Lone Ranger was inspired by Reeves and loosely based on his life. This type of adaptation of black American life did not happen in isolation. Betty Boop was inspired by a black jazz singer in Harlem named Esther Jones, also known as Baby Esther. She performed regularly at the Cotton Club during the 1920s. She attracted the attention of actor Helen Kane, who adopted her style. Kane sued the creator of Betty Boop, arguing that her image and style was being used. Unfortunately for Kane, video surfaced of Baby Esther performing in a nightclub. The courts ruled against Helen, stating that she did not have exclusive rights to the booping style or image, and that the style, in fact, predated her. Around this time, the country was also experiencing the Harlem Renaissance, a social, artistic, and intellectual explosion that occurred with the development of Harlem. Some of the most influential people of this era were Langston Hughes, Louis Armstrong, Josephine Baker, Zora Neale Hurston, W.E.B. Du Bois, Billie Holiday, and many more. These people were passionate about learning and using what they learned and felt to create and influence. As we move through history, we approach the period of the Civil Rights Movement. Here is where we find some of the most common names discussed in relation to Black history. When you think of the Civil Rights Movement, you may think of Ruby Bridges, the first Black child to desegregate an all-white school, or Rosa Parks, who refused to give up her seat on a bus. We undoubtedly think of Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. Names that may not be as commonly discussed are names like Claudette Colvin, who at 15 years old refused to give up her seat on a bus before Rosa Parks. Although Colvin pioneered the bus protest, the NAACP didn't think she was a good spokesperson for the movement and thus shifted their focus to Parks. Another less common name is that of Fred Hampton. Hampton facilitated the creation of many free initiatives like a children's breakfast program, health clinics, political education classes, transportation to jails, and daycare centers. His work was so impactful that the FBI and Chicago police strategically assassinated him at the young age of 21. There were many other overlooked leaders during the Civil Rights Movement. It took many moving pieces, unity, and intentional action from the Black community to accomplish what they did at that time. These enlightened people used what they had learned, shared that information, and applied it to create change. Although only few names were popularized during this movement, the work that they accomplished was built on the foundation of many. Today, we live in a generation who has seen to come to pass what many of our ancestors believed to be impossible. We are not slaves. Most of us live relatively comfortable lives, enjoying the liberty to do as we wish. We have even witnessed this country be led by its first Black president. As a community, we have to remember not to take these accomplishments for granted. We have the privilege of looking back and studying the accomplishments of those who came before us. We have the freedom of self-expression. There once was a time where our true thoughts and feelings had to be hidden from the world. Our basic rights to humanity were denied us. It is important to remember our values and to not slip into the sinking sand of greed or the pursuit of wealth. We must never adopt the passions of an oppressive, broken system. We must continually examine our lives, our values, and ourselves and determine what it is that is truly good and worth pursuing. We find those values etched into the words, history, and wisdom we have to look back on as we navigate the struggles we face in this country. Many would like to believe that because slavery has been abolished, that the oppression of brown-skinned people has been dissolved as well. This is the furthest from the truth. We still see echoes of slavery in the Latin American community where it is easy to access a work visa to come to this country and work long hours, mostly in fields with strict limitations, but it is almost impossible to legally access a permanent resident visa or citizenship in a reasonable time frame due to all of the legal loopholes and unreasonably outrageous price fees required to obtain it. Do not misunderstand my reference. I am not comparing the working conditions of migrant workers to those of slaves. However, I am saying that the limitations that kept migrant workers from fully accessing the freedom to live and participate in a country whose success is connected to their hard labor is similar to the exploitation we saw of slaves. Their labor is desired, yet we rally for walls and laws that place unreasonable obstacles between them and their desire to legally access a land that declares its belief that all men are created equal and have the right to pursue liberty and happiness. We also find people of color are disproportionately targeted, stopped, suspected, incarcerated, and shot by police. Children as young as 13, almost all Black, are sentenced to life imprisonment for non-homicide offenses. Black defendants are 22 times more likely to receive the death penalty for crimes whose victims are white rather than Black, a type of bias that the Supreme Court has declared inevitable. We are too practiced in ignoring the victimization of any Black person tagged criminal. Many Americans are willing Many Americans are willing spectators to horrific acts as long as we're assured they are in the interest of maintaining order. We as a people still face systematic oppression and live under the weight of stereotypes and misinformation about our culture, many of these ideas shaped during slavery. We cannot, nor should we desire to control the narratives others have placed on us as a community. We know who we are. We know that we have the same right as every other human being to create our own narratives of our lives. We may be written down in history with bitter, twisted lies. We can be trodden in the very dirt, but like dust, we rise. We rise by continuing to learn from our past and present, and by teaching what we learn to those around us. Looking back on our history, there is a common theme, a desire to learn and to teach. One of the first rights stripped from slaves. Each one of us has a responsibility to learn and share what we have learned. We are all teachers and we are all students. Marian Wright Edelman said, "Education is for improving the lives of others and for leaving your community better than you found it." Nelson Mandela said, "Education is the most powerful weapon you can use to change the world." Today, as we sit here in this room, I have to ask, what are you doing to further your learning? How are you sewing back into the community around you? As we see through the revision of our history, the change we seek does not come passively. It comes through sacrifice, intention, unity, and awareness. None of the freedoms that we enjoy today as a people have come to us by accident. The people I discuss today are history, but they were also just people, like me and like all of you. We are living, moving history. Every day that we live, our stories are being written. How are you contributing to the legacy that our ancestors left for us to inherit? What foundation are we creating for our children and their children to stand on? What will be the message of our generation? History shows us that we won't all play the same role, and that's okay, because each role is significant. Some of you sitting in these chairs are leaders, the face of a movement, the voice that history will echo. To you I encourage, find your mission, use your voice, and carry yourself with dignity and respect, because I promise you, people are already watching. Others of you, you are the brains, the administration, the support, also known as the bones, the very structure the forerunners rest on. Change does not happen without you. Some of you may lurk in the shadows and take notes when no one is looking. You may feel small at times, but your role is big. We have to work together. As the saying goes, a house divided against itself cannot stand. Let this not be the only time of year that we come together to remember, learn, and encourage one another. Let this Black History Month be the springboard for how you carry out the rest of the 10 months of this year. After we reflect and re-examine our belief system, we must decide what we are going to do with this new information, where we intend to go with the beliefs we've discovered. It's not enough to simply hear these stories and absorb this information. Let it shape you and how you govern your life. And this is how we live lives of intention. That's all I have for my essay. What we're going to do next is we're going to move into a conversation panel with 3 of our elders from our community from Lucedale, Mississippi. I would ask you guys if you would come to the front. What we're going to do, or what I'm going to do, is I'm going to ask them some questions just about their lives, and we're just going to wrap up with that. So if you look. Yeah.
No.
Before we get into these questions, I want to take a little time to let these 3 elders from our community to introduce themselves to you guys. So we can start from here and we can move to the end.
Okay. I'll remain sitting if that's okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Rashida Hakim, and my family is most of the people here. So, of course, a native of Lucedale. I, with the help of these two people here, was able to go to college. Both of these people have had a major impact on my life. Ms. Alexander is the first person I knew, who went to college straight through, lived in the dorm, on campus. And when she came to work here to teach, she lived with my grandparents. And I lived with my grandparents, so I got to know her very well. And of course, she had a major influence on my life. Mr. Taylor was the high school principal when I was going to junior high and high school, elementary and high school. And he also had a major impact on my life. He helped me get into college, but before that, he and his wife took us to Hattiesburg, to a television station. It was a talent hunt, and several for music. So after I graduated that summer, he helped me get a loan to Jackson State. Several years later, after I moved back to George County, he helped me get a job teaching public school music. That was a long time ago. So I'm just saying, I owe a lot because they were major turning points in my life, and I give him credit. He did that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I have to stand so I can look folks in the eye. I'm sure I'm the oldest person in this building. And these folks talk about history. Well, see, I lived it. I'm 94 years old.
Wow.
And I would just like to challenge you. All these programs are good. But I'm going to tell you something, folks. You don't go to school. Get your children to go to school and get something in their head. They're not going anywhere. Mm-hmm. These excuses, you got to throw them away now. Mm-hmm. Make your children have pride. The old country lady said, the black of the band is sweeter than juice.
Okay.
I guess I stand. To all of you, some of you my students, and some of you are your parents or grandparents were my students. And as Ms. Harkeen said, I lived in Basin. And I taught in a one-room school, and it was that church, Mount Pleasant United Methodist Church. And we had four grades. And you want to know how I taught 4 grades in that one-room church. It was one of the most joyous occasions for me and teaching experience because we all learned together. We had to even provide our heat. The church would let me turn on the gas heater until the wood heater would warm up. And then at recess time or lunch time, we had to go out in the woods and pick up limbs and knots and things like that for the wood heater the next morning. It was difficult, but then we all learned together. And I enjoyed it very much, and I enjoyed living in their home. I've never seen working people like her grandparents were. And they were the most blessed people. Whatever they planted came up and produced lots and lots of food for all of us. I want to talk about the school system in George County. When I came along, we had no high school. We only could go to the 10th grade. And then that was the end of our formal education. And it just so happened some of our families lived close by that we lived with them. I had a sister in Mobile, so I finished 11th and 12th grade in Mobile at Central High School. And the Tablets, they had relatives in Alabama, so Mr. Taylor finished over there. Miss Taylor
had relatives in Hattiesburg. She completed her education, high school education in Hattiesburg. And the Sargents and the McKinneys had family on the coast, so they went to Moss Point. And my husband and the other young men, the Moody men, all went to Piney Woods. Piney Woods was, and still is, a live-in campus educational facility. They used to call it an institute. And you could work your way there. You could do 2 years of high school and then 2 years of college. So that's where most of the men in Georgia County went for their, to finish their education, is Piney Woods. And I want to challenge the young people. I don't have to challenge this young lady and that family, because out of that family, we had the first valedictorian in Georgia County, black valedictorian. And then in the Talbot family, we had the first Jared Polk, was the first salutator. And I want you to know he is an aerospace engineer, now employed out from Savannah, Georgia. And I don't know where the valedictorian, George. Yes.
He's San Francisco.
He's getting his PhD at UC Berkeley.
All right. So you can make it. The harder it is, seems like the better you strive for it. And you got a hard time here in Georgia County right now. I think the new superintendent is gonna make a difference. But up until now, our kids, they're undisciplined, and they seem like, now I can speak from experience, because we work one evening every week, and I see our Spanish person in here who came down and helped us, and Ms. Harkeen, one-on-one working with the children out at the Oakland Community Center. So we see them, and we see them somewhat perplexed, I might say confused. They're moving up in grades, and they're really not ready. And that's a sad situation. So those of you who have advanced, reach back and try to help somebody else. First start in your own household, that's what the Bible says, and then move out. So help your little brothers and sisters and your neighbors. And thank you, Wilson.
So what I'll do is I'll start with a question. Anyone can answer, all of you can answer. It's not limited to one person. If you don't have anything to say or you don't feel like it's for you, you don't have to answer. So I'll just ask the questions, and as you feel, you can share. So the first question that I have is, what was school like for you growing up, and what type of Black history, if any, did you get in school?
I think I just told you what it was like for me.
Yes, you did. Did you get any Black history in school at all? Was it taught?
It was taught at home.
Okay.
Our parents told us about what my grandparents was a slave. And they told us what it was like and how they moved out of it. They taught us the Bible, and they taught us how we could go forward. They inspired us.
Well, I grew up in a county that seceded from the state of Mississippi, became the free state of Jones. Therefore, we had a little different experience where I grew up. All the Black people in my community owned their own land back in the old days, because my great-grandmother was a slave to a guy named Newt Knight. When he freed all his slaves, he got all his ex-slaves, he helped them get some land. And therefore, the community I grew up was a little different. It was all Black. Everybody owned their own land. We had a school. So I don't know about these little schools. But no school will do you any good. I don't care how good the building is. if you don't get something between your ears, you're gonna be just like grandma was. So I just like to encourage all parents in here, see your children go to school. And I can tell you to pay off. Because I was one of the first country boys that hadn't finished college to be commissioned a lieutenant in the Army.
Okay.
Because I had been to school. I was an Army sergeant when I was 18 years old, so don't have no excuse. And I grew up in the bushes. You know, just find something you can do and do it. Of course, my mother had something to straighten me out. When I was 12, you know, I tell you this, let's go. So when I was 12 years old, I told her, I said, I ain't going to school no more. She knocked me down. Took a window stick like a beat it. And I didn't miss another day. So, being too easy on them, my point is being too easy on them gonna cause you to cry at night. Because you're gonna be in jail. You know, they're running short on prisoners up there in Parchment because you got to turn out some of them over. Don't let it be your son or daughter that feel that spot. Then don't come home crying about what they did to my child. You raise him right. Raise him to the society he's living in and teach him how to do better. Or else he's going to be right up there in jail. In George County, 8% of the people in George County are black. It's one of the whitest counties in Mississippi. But we want to take over the jail. See what I'm saying? I am tired of hearing folks saying the white folks won't let me do that. I grew up among them. But I tell you what, I'm an old man now, but I hadn't had a job in 35 years and don't want one.
You don't have to have a job.
Hey, you got it.
Auntie?
Well, I have to start off by saying, despite the horrible experience that we come from, black people have nothing to be ashamed of.
That's
right.
The culture, the American culture, is black culture. The music, the art, sports, really, I don't care what area you're looking at, all over the world, people imitate black culture. And so I didn't know anything about these words I'm using now until I went to college. But I'm saying to you that the music that you sing is history, okay? The study of black music is just as deep and broad as the study of any music from any culture. So I learned most of what I understand through music. So during slavery, music is what kept the black people alive spiritually. And it wasn't so much because they enjoyed singing, it was because you were made to sing in order to make the work flow. So a heavy price has been paid for whatever genre you like. If it's hip hop, if it's gospel, if it's jazz, if it's blues, if it's ragtime, whatever it is, somebody already paid for that. So respect it, love it, appreciate it.
Amen.
So, Miss Alexander, you said that you had to preserve black history in the homes and that it was very important. That was one of my questions. What were some of the lessons that you guys were passed down from your parents in those times when they spoke to you?
Right. They always stress hard work. it'll pay off, like Mr. Taylor said later. And they didn't allow you to have do anything. You know how we go out and you might not have been feeling well that day, and you might have not probably understood the instructions so well, or you might just say, I ain't gonna do it. They didn't allow that. You had to do your best. And that's all is required of us, is to do our best. In whatever you do your best. That was one of the basic philosophy.
Would either of you like to add to that?
No, I said that was one of the very basic philosophies
Yes, ma'am.
in your home. Just do whatever you do. Very well. Your best.
I agree with that. We lived in a closed community environment. So the family was the focus. And what I mean is, nowadays I hear a lot of people say, the young people have nowhere to go, they don't have anything to do. I say, go home, study, read, teach somebody, do some chores, make something, create something with your hands. And so that's what we did. My brothers made their own toys out of junk around the house. So don't buy toys for your children. Have them make their toys. Create something. Don't make Toys R Us rich. You know? Just give it a thought.
Okay, so, well, you guys answered some of these questions a little bit already. I had a question, and it was, did any of you know anybody, any family members who were born into slavery? So I know you two, I've heard you say yes. Could you tell us anything about those family members? Any stories, anything that you remember?
It was my grandmother that I never met, but my mother talked about it all the time. And she was reared over there in Montevideo. Montevideo was most of the people there were slave owners. And of course they went to church together over there. You sit on the back seat, and they buried in the cemetery. They're all buried in the same cemetery. And some of the slave owners were very mean, and then some of them were good. And you were blessed if you got a good one.
My grandmother's sister, who also lived in Margaret, and Melissa, she lived to be 104. And one day we went to visit her, and she just opened up and started talking. She said, they say during slavery days that one day there was going to be something that was real small in the sky, but really big on the ground. She said it was the airplane. And then she said, during slavery time, when they wanted to whip a pregnant woman, they would dig a hole in the ground and have her lay down with her belly in the hole so they wouldn't damage the baby. And then the phone rang and she stopped talking. That was in the late 80s, early 90s.
The next question that I have is, can you tell us any significant historical moments in Black history that you witnessed that you didn't expect to see in your lifetime, whether it was good or bad?
For 2 years I worked in Marian, Mississippi. And on the day that Jane Meredith were enrolled at Ole Miss, I was on my way to Meridian, and these cars were passing me with these rebel flags flying up and down the road. They were all going up to Ole Miss. And y'all know they did have a riot that night. Somebody did get killed. But Ole Miss stayed there. He endured. And we had him a couple of years ago here in George County. If you get a George County Times, his picture was in there and a write-up about him, because he was our main speaker. And I never shall forget how proud we were to have him in George County. And I was witnessing what was happening to him that night. And then he related to us about all the things that happened to him while he was at Ole Miss. How they was, nobody roomed with him, and how they would go above at night and stomp and holler and kick and go on, and how he would be in classes and the rest of them would get up and walk out. So he said, you know, I like that, because I got all the education, they were missing that day, because I stayed. But we were blessed to have him. And then when the 3 civil rights workers were killed, I met them while I was in Meridian at a ball game, basketball game, when we were over Harrison Junior High School. And they were passing out these leaflets, these announcing the next day they were going to be in Philadelphia, Mississippi for a grant. I actually met them. And so, you know what happened to me? That was a close call. My mother learned a lot. But I was young then, so, you know, I was a little braver than I am now.
Well, I also have a James Meredith story. When I was a sophomore at Jackson State University, I had a class, History of Civilization, with James Meredith. He was much older. He was a veteran, but he was, you know, he was already married, had a family, and in January, the courts ruled, or December anyway, that the University of Mississippi would have to admit him as a student. And so in the middle of the school year, he did go to Ole Miss, and you know, the rest is history. Back in 1996, I went to work at the University of Mississippi as the music librarian. And James Meredith came to the University of Mississippi to dedicate his papers, his writings, his letters to the library. And in his talk, he urged everybody to learn to read. He started off talking about the national teacher exam, which a lot of black graduates cannot pass. And he said, the reason is you can't read. A lot of black students were very upset with him for saying that. And so he said, get the McGuffey's reader. Learn to read. I'll just stop right there.
Mr. Taylor, you have any moments that you remember?
Oh, what's that?
Any historical moments that you witnessed that you never expected to see, whether they were good or bad?
Well, that wasn't a historical thing. When I left Laura one night, you know how the boys hang around the streets? I saw a crowd getting up. I didn't know what was going on, but I found out that we almost witnessed the last black person got lynched in Mississippi. Howard Wash in Law. Took him out to the jailhouse and lynched him. I was gone yesterday. And then every country man that had an old piece of shotgun had his own sitting out behind his house waiting on him to come after him. He was going to shoot him. So being old as I am, I witnessed so many events until I don't know which one comes first. But I found out you got to learn how to read and write before you can stop those things from happening again. Just think of it, how many black children you got walking around here now that can't read their name? Going over there to the schoolhouse, taking a soft course. Them folks want you to take a soft course because you can't compete for them jobs. They're talking about, I can't find a job. Well, in my day, when I was coming up, you'd find one. Because your parents already had one for you.
Amen. To the end.
And then they make you go to work. We think our children is too good to go to work. When anybody controls you, all they got to do is keep you a second-class citizen, is keep you poor. It bothers me to see a young person 25 years old in the welfare line. I just see folks there. I've never been there. I've always been in the field working somewhere. Let's teach our children, don't ask for it, beg for it, work for it. We're teaching them to sit around the house and look at TV. You ought to kick that TV out the back door. Put him out there and let him work. It'll pay off. I've raised children, and they had to work. Couldn't stay in my house and sleep while I worked. We got to stop thinking about how you can get something for nothing and get up and go to work. That's what we ought to teach our children. And you talk about they won't let us do so. Stop that. If you don't work, you ain't gonna get no check.
Amen. Amen. Amen.
I'll just plug this in. Uncle Charlie Grant, he was a Sunday school superintendent at Mount Pleasant. I grew up in Mount Pleasant Church. And I remember hearing him say over and over and over again, it's the only thing I remember that he ever said, actually. He said, get a good education because can't nobody take it away from you.
Amen.
I had one last question, but we're running a long time, so I want to see, before I ask my question, is there anybody in here that has a question that they want to ask? All right, if not, I will ask my last question, and we'll wrap things up. So this is a little bit of a lighter question. The question is simply, who are some of your favorite writers, musicians, and authors who influenced you heavily?
Well, for me, it's B.B. King.
Okay.
Because he grew up in the Delta, Mississippi. Couldn't read and write, but he could tear that guitar up. And he went from a plowboy to a military.
All right.
That's an impression to me. Any of you young folks ever heard B.B. King sing them blues?
Yes,
Pull them
sir.
chords on that guitar. You know what I'm talking about.
All right.
I don't have a specific because there are so many. And I'm reading the book now about civil rights. I checked it out in this library in Mississippi. And I'm finding out some very interesting things.
I've already spoken to, outside of my parents and my family, the ones who have had a major influence on my life, and I stand on it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, as we wrap this up, I want to just share with you, like they said, I want to reiterate, there is no excuse. There is no reason why you can't be learning. If you don't have enough money to buy books, you can request to have the books that you want to read through the library. That's a free resource. So if you don't feel like the library reflects you or what you want to learn, request books. It's right here. It's free. Utilize it.